Hello, I just wanted to talk about equality, diversity and inclusion in the higher education sector and think about if it is equality or equity that we're trying to explore to make sure that our future students, our existing students, are actually accessing their full quota of education. Specific students that I'm thinking about now are the neurodiverse grouping of students. So just to draw the difference between equality and equity, one of the equality measures that we have right now, usually for students with neurodiversity, would be to suggest that 25% extra in the examination room, for example, or time to submit brings about equality. I would suggest that is, as the current notion is equality, it doesn't mean they are equal in their accessing their best selves or being assessed as their best selves. It just means they have 25% extra. And if you look at the array of neurodiverse people, 25% extra, one, usually isn't enough, and two, they have been trying to access learning months before they get assessed, and really, realistically, probably they're taking sometimes twice as long to learn the same amount of material, which is 100% extra. By the time they come to the assessment, they are usually very tired, quite exhausted. They have an arrangement of concerns around exam specifically. Usually it's the fear of failure, because examinations almost is their worst point of being assessed. If they were to opt for all different arrays of assessment, the last one, to be honest with most students, is examination, but specifically neurodiverse would consider this the last form. So for me, are we looking for equality, as in it, we've given you 25% extra, so therefore we're saying that's enough? Or should we really be saying, actually, we should be looking for equity? And if it takes you slightly longer than 25%, that's okay. 25% is a suggested. So it might run on for another 5% longer, 10% longer, but that's okay, because remember, you're already tired, you're already exhausted, and we do not want time as a barrier to stop you from completing this assessment. So there's my equality and equity. Equity, really, the difference in equity is trying to remove any barriers wherever we can that are known, that says, so long as you can be your best self, and maybe 25%, which is the spectrum across everybody gets 25%, isn't right for you, because that's equality and it's not equity. It's not seeing the individual in the middle of this assessment. So I very much focus on, if you're moving towards equity rather than equality, then you think about actually what would make it completely inclusive. So for example, some students are absolutely fine with exams, but some would prefer to actually do a presentation of their knowledge. They would sooner do a presentation and be assessed and questioned to demonstrate their knowledge, because they're oral or they're more visual, as opposed to academic and written literacy skills. Because we aren't really, usually, when we're looking for assessing, we're not assessing, I wouldn't say, literacy skills. What we're looking for is to assess knowledge of that individual and understanding of process and policy and how that applies in their specific profession that they're taking their degree for. So this is where I start exploring, if we're moving towards an inclusive assessment, then, and we want equity in that inclusive assessment, how does that bring in diversity? So I'd like to just explore a little bit with you, what are the diversity factors that we might consider in our neurodiverse students. And I would look at neurodiverse and consider it as a full spectrum, but quite often neurodiverse have more than one, if you like, label that's been given to them. So they might have a label of dyslexia. Usually dyslexia comes with something else. Quite often it might be Erlands, it might be ADHD. Quite often you see a combination. So you might have a ADHD as your label, but you might have a little bit of dyslexia, or you might have, as I've mentioned, Erland's, or you might have dyscalculia. So there is a spectrum. The other part of that spectrum is the autistic spectrum might also fall into that. And within autism, often we have this label of Asperger's. Okay, so there's usually a combination. Quite often one doesn't completely stand on its own, although you might have that. And within any of those spectrums I've talked about, you might be at the very light touch end, or you might have the heavier touch end. I'm looking at higher education right now, so I would suggest usually the people that we get into higher education, into the university sector, would usually be intellectually able to compete with their competitors, in fact, their colleagues, sorry, their student cohort. In fact, I would suggest that if they are in the university sector, they are usually very, very bright because they've had to develop coping mechanisms to get through their GCEs and through their A-levels, which are very exam-based. And that's where the fear of failure comes from. They've had this excess of assessment, examination assessments, right the way through. The majority are hoping to get into a university setting, be taught as adults in an adult-to-adult manner. And I've never seen assessments, examinations take place in the workplace, which is what we're supposed to be getting students ready for. So you do have to sometimes challenge, is examination the best route for some students when we never see examinations in the workplace? We do see quality assessments of pieces of work that's produced. We do see how valuable they are, what they contribute to the workplace. We see soft skills, how they present, how they work with colleagues, how they sell themselves, market themselves, how they can conduct research, but very rarely do we do an examination, I would suggest, in the workplace. So we need to think about how the spectrum of assessment fits in with the profession that that person who's in HE is going into. Because ultimately HE is getting them ready for their professional lives, their contribution into society. The other area I would like to explore is, if we sit there, examination is one of them, and say, right, you've all got an exam. Okay, how fair is that? Some people are exquisitely good at very short-term recall. Their memories are astounding. If I asked them in 2 weeks' time, could they recall that? Quite a lot of these exceptional short-term memory people would not be able to recall at all. Whereas if I'd asked them to apply what they know into some type of report or some type of presentation, the recall in 2 weeks is usually much better. So I just think we need to make sure there's a spectrum, a different ways of assessing knowledge. And if one way fails individuals, then we need to be really reflective of what is the best way to demonstrate your knowledge if we can't find it in the assessment route that we've chosen. And remember, in HE, there is a lot of flexibility in how you can assess for learning and knowledge. So what happens if we're getting this wrong? We're over-assessing, we're using the wrong assessment. Well, are we really accessing people's best selves? Are we letting them thrive? Are we letting them demonstrate how good they can potentially be? So we're developing their confidence in their competence. I would challenge you and perhaps say, we're not, we need to do something different. We might need to find a different way, a more harmonized way with that individual. And remember, if we go back to neurodiverse, the other label is neurotypical. So at the moment, we say people are either neurotypical or they're neurodiverse, when the reality is it's a natural occurring phenomena. We are all different. Our brains are a bit like our fingerprints. They are unique to us. There is no one brain the same. They're naturally occurring difference in the brain, and therefore we're naturally occurring have different strengths that we can draw on, whether it's auditory, visual, whether it's a combination of social, emotional, whether we're empathic. We all have different parts of our brain, and our brain functions different for every one of us. So I think that's something to just remember. So hopefully it's given you a good idea where neurodiversity fits. If you want to look at the types of assessment, I will put in another stream for you to understand the spectrum of the different types of assessment. I'll also be recording some of the typical attributes we would see in the different labels within the neurodiverse spectrum. So hope you enjoy this. Thank you. Bye-bye.